Washburn Alumni Association. And we're delighted to be able to co-sponsor this event with the Dole Institute and the University of Kansas Alumni Association. Senator Bob Dole is, without a doubt, one of Washburn's most noteworthy alumni. Has received 4 degrees from Washburn, undergraduate and law degree and 2 honorary doctorates. And we're excited to give you this unique chance to learn more about his story and his legacy. Little did I know 32 years ago when I began working towards my business degree here at Washburn that I'd one day work for Senator Bob Dole, let alone become the alumni director here at my alma mater. And it was a privilege working with him, and is an honor to serve Washburn and our alumni. Washburn's reputation is built on the achievements of its alumni, and alumni like Senator Dole, Judge Sam Crow, and many other alumni across Kansas and around the country. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. A show of hands of those. There's a lot of Dole staffers here and folks that have worked on campaigns and what have you. You might just raise your hands to see some of you in the audience. Appreciate you being here, and a lot of the other folks in the audience today. So again, I want to thank you, and I'm going to turn the microphone over from our folks from the University of Kansas.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Tyler Rockers with the KU Alumni Association, and as Susie said, we're thrilled to be here, and we're very grateful to the University, or Washburn University, and their Alumni Association for hosting us tonight. Topeka being our second largest alumni base, we're thrilled to come over here and see you all any chance that we get, and the support that we get from you all is outstanding. I do want to give a special thank you to those of you who are members of the KU Alumni Association. Your membership allows us to have great partnerships like the one we have with the Dole Institute, and allows us to bring programming like this to you here in Topeka. So I know you're ready to get to the highlight of the evening, so I will now introduce Clarissa, who will talk to you next.
Thank you, Tyler. And as Tyler said, my name is Clarissa Unger, and I'm the Development Coordinator for the Dole Institute of Politics. We are very excited to be here in Topeka tonight and with all of you. We have done a program like this in Lawrence about a year ago with the KU Alumni Association, and we just had so much fun with it that we asked them if we could keep doing it with them, and we got so lucky that the Washburn Alumni Association wanted to partner with us on this as well. So you are all in for a treat tonight. We thank you for joining us and encourage you to come and visit us at the Dole Institute anytime. And with that, I will turn it over to our senior archivist, Audrey Coleman. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. I'm going to take a minute to get settled and comfortable because I'm going to be standing here a while. Thanks so much, everyone. Again, in the parade of thank yous, allow me to thank you, the Washburn Alumni Association and the KU Alumni Association for having us and hosting this event. It's a real pleasure to be here. I also want to thank Martha Imparato. Where are you, Martha? With the Mabee Library, the Librarian and Archivist here at Washburn for bringing their collection, some of the highlights of their collection of Dole material paired with material from the Dole Archive. So if you haven't taken the time yet to look at this material, hopefully at the end your curiosity will be piqued and you'll be able to kind of see some things reflected in our records there. I'm willing to wager you're here tonight because you feel you have a connection to Bob Dole. As a Kansan, as a student or affiliate of one of these 2 great Kansas universities, of which Dole is also an alum, or perhaps as a supporter, colleague, family member, or friend. Or maybe you've just come to admire that he didn't shy away from the bipartisan solution, which helped to bring us the ADA and many other pieces of disability legislation, as well as now standard nutritional programs such as food stamps and nutritional supplements. It's a connection that you probably don't give much thought to on a daily basis, but it's both a live one as well as an historical one. As an archivist, I'm a spectator to relationships as they exist in the historical records. I also bear the responsibility of seeking out the stories that the records omit. From my vantage point, working with Dole's history, I can see how we're all connected, us Kansans, us Dole people, in the past, the present, and even into the future. If we can capture this phenomenon, when we are all gone, we'll have the record to show how we all fit together during this Dole era, one of proud Kansas leadership, a fine tribute to both the state and the senator himself. Tonight, in our interviews with the Honorable Sam Crow and Susie Hoffman, Washburn Alumni Association Director, undeniably leaders in their own right, we'll add some fun and fascinating news stories to the historical record. Snapshots they'll certainly be. We can't begin to encompass the full breadth of Dole and his relationship with Topeka or Topekans just this evening. As you listen, and I was glad to see some Dole staffers out there, you'll probably say to yourself, I remember, or what about? You are the expert of your own life and times, and we encourage you to share your living memory of the senator or reflections on his legacy with us by writing to, this is one word, Bob Dole Story at ku.edu. And this address is also on your program. For those of you who don't do email, there's also a mailing address there as well. As Dole recounts in his 2005 book, One Soldier's Story, his relationship with Topeka began with his hospitalization at Winter General, where he was treated for his severe wartime injuries. It would become the city that gave birth to Dole's political career. In 1949, Dole and his wife Phyllis returned to Kansas from Tucson, Arizona, where Dole had attended the university there. He began studies at the then-named Washburn Municipal University, where he eventually earned a BA and JD in 1952. He and Phyllis lived at an apartment complex called, prophetically, the Senate, which now still stands at 9th and Tyler, just west of the State House. Judge Crow, did they call you Judge Crow back then? Did they call you Judge? He wasn't listening. The Senate. I just said that the senator, he and Phyllis lived in the apartment complex called the Senate, which was prescient. So I wondered if maybe they might call you during those times if they referred to you as Judge, if they knew, or they just call you Sam.
Well, let me go back to the Senate. Whatever that was after that, whatever you said after that, because there's sort of a vibration here as far as. I'm sure that I don't need that, but at any rate, the Senate was the best place in town, and it wasn't very far from the Capitol. And we visited, of course, Ruth and I were there often, occasionally. That's probably better. And it was a delightful place to go where Phyllis and Bob had a very nice apartment. Ruth and I lived on campus in a barracks. The barracks came from some army post that had been abandoned for years. It was, as a matter of fact, it was in such condition that you could roll a marble between the various housing that was there. When I say housing, it's just a barracks without a roof. No roof on, well, we had a roof of the house, but there's no roof at all, and it just, as you went from one section to another, there was not distance between one front door and the other. Bill Miller Hall, so I don't want to get into all of that, I guess. That's premature, but at any rate, I will. Bill Miller, our very dear friend, Bob and Phyllis.
And you'll see these gentlemen pictured here. You can't see it, Judge, but we've got your photo up there.
Oh, okay.
With Dole and Bill.
There were really 6 of us. Generally, Bob and Bill and I were together a lot, but also the 6 of us were together. And is this what you asked me?
This is exactly what I want from you.
Well, you know, there's nothing complicated about trying to remember 60 years ago. I have difficulty in remembering last month, last week, what did we do? But at any rate, Bill and Mary Lou and Bob and Phyllis and I and Ruthie, by the way, when there was a question raised as to whether or not who had been participated in campaigns, my wife did not raise her hand. She was very effective and worked hours, at least 8 to 10 hours each day in the little place, well, not little, but the room where it was in the Jayhawk Theater, or the Jayhawk Theater and a hotel. It had a theater then. She worked in the office that had been reserved for Bob, And we would be there daily. Bob would be there almost daily, working on the various people who were to be notified or notices that were to be given, and whether they were spelled correctly, the names and the addresses. That is very important. And just 6 months ago, I asked Bob, do you still do that? And he says, yeah, it's very important. I give that to all those politicians out there who wish to run for something. Be sure and put the name and the address correctly, particularly the spelling correctly. That was sort of fun that we had, and we don't have any fun with it right this minute, but it was fun then when we decided to do that. I've gone farther than I thought that you gave me a question.
Well, I want to ask you, when do you, so in the depth of your memory, do you remember when you first met Bob Dole? Or how did your friendship begin?
Okay. I had graduated from KU, and Bob was looking for some place, and we proceeded to go to the old, I think it was Morgan Hall. Jim, is that right? No. What was the name of it? Boswell, that's right, Boswell. And it was, as you remember, it was a decapitated, it was a terrible building. And of course it had no heat and it had no air conditioning. And we all smoked at that time, so you can imagine all the lawyers in there are the hopeful lawyers. At any rate, I went in to you walk up a number of stone steps, walked inside, and at that time the classrooms were minimal. That is, there weren't very many of them. And they had chairs in them like you had in grade school or junior high or whatever it's called now. You know, it had the piece in front that you would put your books on, and then had it hooked onto the side of the back of the chair. And you would, I don't know how left-handed people do, but Bob was left-handed at that time because of his injuries. And we proceeded to walk in there almost together. Bob came and put that machine down on the front row and tried to find a place to plug it in. Well, this building was old enough that it didn't have a lot of plugs. And so we were searching for plugs for some time and did find one. I didn't know Bob from anything at that time, but I could tell that, frankly, that this guy was an important person. And he had been through a great deal. And he was surviving, and he was going to succeed. And you have that kind of a feeling. So that's the first time I met Bob.
We've gotten all out of order, so now I have to.
Well, I can go on.
You just got to ride this out. It's all wonderful, and they're all on my checklist, so it's. No, I wanted to, what do you think, I wanted to hear more about you and your biography.
Oh, that's very brief in regard to that.
Well.
Lived in Topeka all of my life, except maybe sometimes that we got work someplace else. And grew up here, went to high school and junior high, then graduated as soon as all of us graduated at that time in 45. All of us went right into the service. Then after the service came back, graduated from KU, then went to Washburn Law School. I went to Washburn Law School not knowing really. My dad said when I was growing up, I remember, if you ever go to law school, go to Washburn. Are there any KU people here? At any rate, so
they're being shy.
I did go to Washburn, and after law school, practiced law for about 30 years, practiced with a law firm here in Topeka. Following that, then with Bob's consent and direction and so forth, I became a federal judge, and I've been a federal judge since 1981. And the interesting thing, President Reagan signed the papers, the commission, on December the 10th, one of our son's birthday. That's the only reason I can remember that date. We then proceeded to, I'll make it this very short. After that, here we are.
Well, you mentioned a little bit about the state of Boswell Hall. Like, could you tell us a little bit more about your life as a student, as a law student at Washburn?
As you know, Bob used the machine to listen to all the instructions by the instructors, and he would go home and to Senate and laboriously write the notes that he had heard them again. So really he had 2 lectures. One he listened to, and the second time he listened to at home. And it was, I felt very inadequate when I watched him do this, because with his left hand it was very difficult to write, particularly listening to something and then writing it down. And I'd been with Bob many times in his apartment when he would do this. And he usually had on a T-shirt, and you could see, well, he had bad injuries. He always had cigarettes rolled up. And remember how guys used to do that? Old T-shirts in World War II and maybe now. You put the cigarettes in there, and then you rolled it up and kept it there for whatever, probably to smoke them. Ruth and Phyllis, Bob's wife, and Bill Miller and his wife, Mary Lou, we became close friends and were together often. We would generally, if we had the money, we would go to a movie maybe once every 2 months or 6 weeks, something like that. Mary Lou and Bill would want to go to a musical. Ruth and I would go to a cowboy movie. And Bob and Phyllis, Bob would usually select some intellectual program, which we went with him, but it was sort of boring. But that was and then we had another, the 6 of us had a card game that we played. And I talked to Bob just last week, and I asked him if he remembers. He said, I don't remember the name of that card game. And I don't either, and Ruth doesn't either remember it. Nobody remembers it. Everybody's dead that was Jim not still here. But we would play cards, and we played with pennies. If we had those pennies now, we'd probably have a substantial amount of money because they were old pennies, and they were in a cigar box. Each one of us had an old cigar. We'd like to have the cigar box too, but we'd carry that with us, and we would either go to Bob's house or we'd go to Bill's. They didn't come to ours. I can never remember one time they ever came to ours. We always went to their houses, and I understand that. But we would play cards for a period of time, maybe once every other day or every third day. We never won. We never lost. Mary Lou cheated. Mary Lou is not here, and this is not any criticism of her at all. Just one of those stories that we remember, and Bob remember too. I think Bob accused her of doing. But that was our existence while we were in law school. We did many things together. It was always evident that Bob was going to be somebody, in my view, and do something. Bill became the president of Security Benefit, and because of Bob, I'm a federal judge. So that's what happened to the 3 of us. That's about all.
Do you remember anything about Bob's run for the House of Representatives?
About what?
When Bob ran for the House of Representatives in 1950.
Yes, I remember that. Of course, we're talking about, it's in Russell, it's not Shawnee County where he's running for representative. Mm-hmm. And I proceeded to, I had represented an insurance company in Russell. Really sort of interesting, I guess. And so Ruth and I moved to Russell for a very short period of time while I was doing this. And Bob was in the legislature, and he proceeded to have to go, and he was going to be gone 2 weeks. So he asked me to help him in the county attorney's office. And I did. It developed that some of the people in Russell were not paying their bills. And as a city lawyer, we sue people that don't pay their bills. You don't do that in Russell. it really is true. You figure out some other, well, I was accustomed to going ahead and just, if they didn't pay and I asked them and called them and, no, I'll get to it next year. I just thought, well, I know how to get to it. And I don't think Bob was very pleased with me, though, when he came back and found some disgruntled people in Russell. But that's my only recollection of being in Russell. No, we were in Russell, and Bob and Phyllis have a house there. I remember one of the things that Bob and Phyllis did together, we stayed in the bedroom at their house, and remember these orange crates? I mean, you old people will remember this, but they were crates that had slits on them, and they were divided. There were two parts, and they were full of fruit. What we did, some people, you'd take out all the fruit, and you would make a little dresser. You'd have one on one side, up, one over here, and they had the cutest little dresser that they made out of crates, you know, fruit crates. Now, that may not be important to you, but I remember that. I remember that 60 years ago. And I know right where it was in the room where we were staying down at their house. That's outside of school, outside of school. Really, Bob was active in almost everything in law school. He was an excellent student. All of us relied upon him to refresh us on the lecture that might be there, and he would accommodate all of us. We would have little sessions discussing the Paul's Graph case. You guys don't get a laugh out of that because it's so stupid that we have the Paul's Graph case. But we spent a lot of time on that case. Bob was a close friend of Jim Arns, and we all became close friends with Jim. Jim is not with us anymore. I must tell you a story about a professor. I think his name was Larson. He had a birth defect. He had no right, a piece of a right arm. He smoked Bull Durham. And everybody smoked. We smoked during class. We had opened up the windows. And it was a very leisure kind of school that we went to. But Professor Larson would be able to take that, some of you know what Bull Durham is. It's a little sack, a little string at the top, you tighten the string and so that the tobacco didn't fall out. And you put them in your pocket and it has a little tab on it with a little Bull Durham thing on it. So you'll see those on old movies. Ruth and I watch a lot of those. But you'll see them in movies and you'll see them in that classroom. And the Professor Larson, one hand, would take that out of his pocket, open it, one hand, open it up, get the paper, put the tobacco in the paper, one hand, roll it, and smoke. And would he do that, the whole class would just stop. It is a true story. We would just wait until he'd finished, and then he would smoke the cigarette. The professor smoked during the class. I remember Bob, I think Bob made every class an A, except one. And someone gave, he doesn't like that person anymore. Someone gave him a D. Maybe it was a C. When you see him, will you ask him whether it was a C or a D?
Yes.
It was not and he is not pleased.
Do you remember
with
what class
grade.
it was?
Has he told you about that?
I don't think so.
I bet not. What is the next thing that we should talk about?
Well, I did want to, before I had a message, or a question I wanted to ask you about the campaigns in the 60s. But before we moved on, I wanted to be sure that we mentioned the woman here whose photo you see. Her name is Beth Bowers, and most of you here at Washburn are probably familiar with her. But she was also a Washburn Law graduate, class of 48, and a law librarian at the time that these gentlemen were students. And Judge, you must not have spent much time at the library because you didn't remember her when I asked.
Bob did. He spent time at the library. He spent time working at Santa Fe, moving freight.
Yeah.
Pretty good at that.
So Senator Dole credits Beth Bowers for being the one to inspire him, to animate him to run for the House of Representatives as a law student, and so he widely credits her as the person who inspired his
sure
political
she did,
career while you were working at the Santa Fe and having other responsibilities to take care of. So you mentioned when we spoke a couple of weeks ago some of the campaigns in the 60s, and particularly maybe something in a apartment complex or some events that you were in charge of for Dole. Would you tell us about that story?
Ruthie was very much involved. My wife was very much involved with the campaign. There was an office there that was for Dole, and Hotel Jayhawk used to be in my view, was a very important place in Topeka. It was a Republican place. Jim probably remembers this also. But it was a gathering of every person, I think, that was in mankind in Shawnee County and in Kansas. And Ruth kept track of all of those people with no computers then, it was paper and typewriter or hand. And Bob would come in, as I mentioned a while ago. He would come in frequently, and we would make phone calls. He would have a list of people that he would like to call from the office, and then he would instruct us as to what we should do, whatever might be done in a particular case. And it went on for some time. We were, some of you have been in the Hotel Jayhawk. Some of you have been on the lobby part where you would register to have a room. And there we had banners, huge banners with Dole, vote for Dole. And also we had the, what were they? Well, let a winner lead the way. A winner lead the way, something like that. And that was the song that we heard that a lot. And then there were the girls, children, sort of children, that Phyllis made uniforms for, and they were Dole dolls. And they were the cutest things, and they would, how can you not vote for somebody that has a Dole doll? And they would go various places. I remember one time, and I would arrange on occasion, not always, where Bob was going to be and going to speak, and we would like to have John Blow also be there. There was one event that occurred at the time. There was a big movement toward Bob Dole. And so we rented a place in Topeka that had a swimming pool and a diving board and a lot of space around it. And we rented that, and we charged, I think, $50. I can't remember exactly how much. And everybody wanted to go. Marilyn May was going to be there. Now, somebody might know Marilyn May. I heard a rumor back there. It was the marvelous Marilyn May. And so I was doing all these things that all these people, now you've got to realize that there's probably 400 people there, at least, around the swimming pool, all paid, all ready to listen to the speaker. Here I am up there announcing various things. Gee, it's good to see you. I'm awfully glad you came tonight, particularly in the weather. I admire you for coming this evening. At any rate, I was doing that, and then a phone call came and said, Bob's not going to be there. Now, you can't imagine how that happens. You are ready for the guy, because that's the only reason that people are there. Bob says he's not going to be. I said, what am I going to do? He said, do your best. So I remember, do your best, do it with enthusiasm, and also be very careful. I was on the latter. I was very careful. Because I'm not a campaigner. I don't know how to politic. But as a matter of fact, we had a nice evening. I think what we did, we got some booze in the back. It was essential to do something. You can't imagine, maybe you can, that you have about 400 people out around a swimming pool waiting, all of them quiet and nice. They wanted to do that. They want to come up and see Bob too. Well, shake his hand. That's the reason they came there. They wanted to see him. And all they get is me and Marilyn May. That's about all I can do. I could do more, but I'm not going to do it anymore.
All right, before we let you take a break, is there anything else you'd like to share while you're on the hot seat?
I don't feel that way, really.
Oh, good.
I don't think so. I believe that Bob is a very unusual, unique wonderful person. The longer you get to know him, the more you like him, the more you can understand him. I know when he was going through law school and what he's done personally and what he's accomplished personally, it's amazing. It really is. Here, Russell, Kansas. Who ever heard of Russell, Kansas in Chicago, New York, and California? Nobody. Well, I don't know. We have a relative there. But as a matter of fact, going from that position to running for President of the United States, you know, that is awesome. Most people have a lot of money. Bob didn't have any money. Most people have some following, some brotherhood, some relative, some uncle, some brother. Not Bob. Not a thing. Except he worked at a drugstore in Russell. Well, I have a great deal of admiration for him, always have had. And I'm sure he knows it. If he doesn't, maybe this will get to him and he'll find that out. But we've had a fine relationship, always, always. And that's about all I have to say.
Well, thank you, Judge. That's a wonderful words and a good setup for Susie. Because Susie, when you started working for the senator in 1988, right?
87.
87,
actually.
okay. So he was the Republican leader of the Senate and the height of his influence. What was that like, and what was your job, and just kind of in general?
Yeah, I started working for the senator right out of college after I graduated from Washburn in May of '87. I had heard about a possible opening in the office. A sorority sister of mine actually had worked for him for a number of years and decided to go to law school that fall, and they were going to look for somebody to replace her. And I kind of put all my eggs in one basket. I didn't even have a resume typed up, and I thought, well, I'll go ahead and apply for the job, and I'll just wait till I hear to see if I get this job before I apply for anything else. And I finally got the call, and I started there in July 1987, and I handled constituent services for him for about, probably 3/4 of the state of Kansas. So I had no idea until I started working for him that people could actually write to their senator for help, you know, with different federal agencies and what have you. And the great thing about working for him at that time was he had such national notoriety. I mean, everybody knew him when you'd pick up the phone and you'd call the Department of the Army because, you know, some soldier wrote to him and, you know, was hoping that his, you know, they could move his belongings to Germany and bring his wife or what, you know, whatever the problem might be, that you'd pick up the phone and call the Army and you'd say you were with Senator Dole's office, and immediately they knew who he was. Or you'd call Department of Housing and Urban Development or the Veterans Affairs Office, you know, legislative liaison, and he just, you could get so much done and a lot of action quickly because people knew him because he was really pretty famous at the time, getting ready to run for president and then, of course, Republican leader of the Senate.
And you were in constituent services? Is
Yes.
that right? Could you describe a little bit about what your job was there?
Well, when the mail would come every day, we'd open it up to see what folks had written to him about, and it could just be a variety of different problems. Somebody maybe was having trouble getting disability with the Social Security Administration, or they were trying to get a home loan through the Department of Veterans Affairs, or maybe it was an international adoption, trying to get some help with U.S. Embassy in, say, Manila, Philippines, or it could just be, I mean, just when you thought you'd read it all, the mail would come tomorrow and there'd be some other request in there. Some things pretty routine, and then just other things that were just, you know, sometimes just off the wall that you couldn't imagine that somebody needed help with. And letters like that would go back to his office in Washington, D.C., and they'd sort the mail back there, and then anything that was constituent services related, they'd send back to our state offices for us to handle and contact these federal agencies on behalf of residents of Kansas.
You were nice enough to take me on a driving tour of Topeka, Dole Landmarks, driving tour of Topeka recently. Could you describe some of the spots of action that you remember?
Yeah, I was always kind of lucky when I started working there. Whenever the senator would come back to Topeka, I'd get to pick him up at the airport, and he always flew into Billard Airport. And at the time, my car was just a 2-door vehicle, and so I'd always borrow my grandparents' Lincoln Town car. He was used to riding in Lincoln Town cars when when he, back in Washington, and so whenever he was coming to town, I'd call up my grandparents and I'd say, the senator's coming to town, I need to borrow your car tomorrow, and so they'd take it and get it all, spiffied up, take it to the car wash, and my grandpa would get everything vacuumed out, and so I'd go and pick him up at the airport, and we'd have a schedule, an itinerary of, when I'd pick him up and, where I was to take him and what have you, and Topeka's a small enough town between the federal building where we officed and the Billard Airport. I mean, there's a way to get there without really hitting any stoplights, no stoplights between there and Billard Airport. And so I know that a lot of times the Washington D.C. office, when they'd look at that schedule, they'd call sometimes and say, there's no way you can get to the airport and then back in 15 minutes. And, well, but there aren't any stoplights. Trust me, you can get there. But, you take the back roads down Front Street and then head out to the airport. And then every time we'd come back, you drive by Hill's Pet Food, the plant there on the Kansas River, and he'd always point out that his dog, Leader, ate Science Diet dog food, and so if I heard that, 100 times, you'd pick him up. And my dog eats Science Diet dog food, and if you ever pass the Dairy Queen store, ice cream shop, many times you'd have to stop for a chocolate milkshake. Any Dairy Queen was a hot spot, because he loved chocolate milkshakes, and there was one over there near 6th and Branner. Sometimes you'd have to stop there, and one time in particular, he came back to the state. I think it was when Governor Hayden was running for re-election, and there was a campaign stop in town, and at the time, Congressman Roberts was with him, and he had to renew his driver's license, and so I had to take him to the driver's license bureau to get the driver's license renewed. And then on the way back, on the way to this fundraiser, we passed a Dairy Queen, so we had to stop at the Dairy Queen, and they both went inside, and some of the kids that were working in there recognized him, and so he signed autographs on Dairy Queen napkins. And so, I mean, he never met a Dairy Queen that he didn't want to stop at. But a lot of times, I'd pick him up at the airport, every year in conjunction with Kansas Day weekend, usually held at the Ramada Inn, and there's, I think, a few little artifacts down here, but pick him up and drop him off for the weekend, and, usually pick him up on a Friday, because the Native Sons and Daughters, banquet was on Friday evening, and then on Saturday mornings he'd go to all the to the district, Republican meetings and make the rounds, and then of course the Kansas Day banquet on Saturday evening. And you'd get about 2 bites of food in, and then it'd be time to go to the airport. I mean, you never got to eat more than about 3 bites of your dinner before it's time to go, gotta go, he'd say. Off we'd go to the airport.
So I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about the Kansas Day festivities and what it was like to be there, but were you there, or were you just shuttling too much?
Oh, no. Once he was there, once you got him there Friday, then he was really there through, after dinner Saturday evening before you take him to the airport. So lots of fun things that used to happen, at the headquarters, really was at the Ramada Inn downtown at the time. And so, no, you could still have fun. Lots of different receptions and things by other state office holders and the senator and Roberts and all those kind of folks. There's a lot of old young Republicans out in the audience. There were lots of great times at the Ramada Inn.
When we talked earlier, you mentioned that one project that you remember kind of helping build to fruition was the Brown v. Board, the Monroe School project.
Yeah, that would have been a letter that came in the mail one day, and I don't know if it originated in Washington or if we actually got it direct in the Topeka office, but Cheryl Brown Henderson wrote Senator Dole about Monroe School, and at the time I think they were it was, slated to be, demolished, and she contacted the senator to really save Monroe School, that it was a part of national history, wanted to get it on the National Historic Register, And so I did some work early on with that, sent a letter on her behalf to the Department of the Interior to try and save Monroe School, and I worked on it, for several months, but then at some point I had to turn it over to our Washington, D.C. office because eventually it took some federal legislation to make that happen. But the day that they actually dedicated the school as a National Historic Site within the National Park Service, President Bush was here, and I was lucky enough to be there for the dedication of Monroe School, and I thought, gosh, I had a hand in that very, very early on, but it was quite interesting to work on that.
Anything else that comes to mind that you'd like to share with the audience about your experience?
Oh, I never took a political science class when I was a student at Washburn, so to work for a politician or to work in politics like that is nothing that I ever imagined that I'd ever do. And then, during the presidential campaign, we could take a leave of absence to kind of help do some campaign things. So I was lucky to travel to Chicago and back to New Hampshire to do some campaigning and some things. And my folks were so very proud of me when I got this job. In fact, I bet they handed out more of my business cards than I did. And when I ordered my second box of business cards, the gal that was kind of the supply clerk back in the Washington office, she couldn't believe when I ordered another box of business cards. She goes, "My God, how are you passing out so many of these?" And I said, "Well, my parents have been handing out a lot of my business cards." And our business cards as staff, were really identical to Senator Dole's business cards. They were all the same with a raised, gold Senate seal. And, where his said Bob Dole, mine said Susie Hoffman. They were really identical in nature, and my folks handed out an awful lot of business cards over the years.
Yeah, that's a good, I want to go back to this slide. I'm not sure if you all can see that very well, but it's a page out of the congressional records, so the official records of government, and in which there's a tribute to Susan Hoffman dated October 19th, 1995, recognizing Susie for her years of service to Senator Dole.
Yeah.
So pretty cool.
That was really quite nice, and then he had that framed and gave it to me after I left his employment. So yeah, a real nice keepsake. In fact, it's hanging on my office and over here at Washburn.
So would you recommend constituent services or to any young people in the audience?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I've had a couple of students here at Washburn that have gone on to do some similar things, and I said, "Gosh, you're kind of like my little protege." I said, I did that work right out of school at Washburn, and I've kind of, mentored a couple of students that have done some similar things, and they've kind of taken the same path that I did when I was fresh out of school and green around the gills and first job out of college.
All right. Well, thank you both, Judge and Susie, for your comments. Yes.
I think there's probably one person from Russell, Kansas here, and that's Martin Albrecht. Martin lived in, can you imagine? Lived in Russell, knew Bob. Also, I don't want to name everybody here, but there's Ralph Skoog here, and of course Ralph knew Bob, and we worked together with and for him. Jim Sloan is almost as old as I am. And Jim, do you remember something that you'd like to mention, really? Since you're here, would you say hello?
No. Hello.
What did you say? We're almost 90, both of us.
Well, I know. I said hello.
Okay.
One thing I might mention real quick, and I know that you're short on time, and so you maybe are cutting it just a little bit short, but one thing that Judge Crow and I would have experienced really together when I worked for Senator Dole was when our federal building was bombed, the day the gunman came in, and we were both there that day, and it's something that I'll never ever forget. And terrible tragedy that day, but I know we were both there when I worked for him, and I was on the 3rd floor and you were upstairs on the 4th floor, actually, where all hell broke loose.
It did, and we had, of course, a guard who was shot and killed. And I shouldn't really tell. Yes, I will. I had found the defendant guilty, the gentleman who had the bombs and the guns, and he was coming up to be sentenced. Now, as you walk off as you walk off the elevator in the fourth floor of the federal building, you turn to the left, and then you just turn a little bit more, and my chambers was there, and also my courtroom. Well, he was coming up to be sentenced. I don't think he liked me very well, and I think that he came there because, well, I don't know why he came there, but he when he got off the elevator and turned to the left, there was this little rope that you see in theaters, you know, that said you can't go there. He did not go there because of that rope, or I think. And he turned to the right. When he turned to the right, that's where the guard was, and that's where some of the other people were. It was a tragic thing. It was, you just can't really imagine the turmoil that was throughout the entire building, because we heard these shots, and the upstairs on the fourth floor, it had the railings around it's open, like this, and around the buildings, the offices are around. And all of this was glass, and it was shattered. Now, falling huge pieces of glass does cause commotion. That's, you're right, it was a terrible experience, and so many people, matter of fact, some people did not return to work because of that experience. It was a frightening experience, and also he set the car on fire. My office had a window that overlooked the parking lot. That's a kind of not scenery that the federal judge gets, a parking lot. At any rate, no, that's not very funny at all. But the car was down there burning, and it was a ferocious burn. I've never seen a car, except in movies, burn, but he had set it on fire in some way that it went off. And so here we were, we had people outside, the sharpshooters, because they didn't know where this guy was going to go. And so they were all looking up at the windows, wondering where he might be. And of course, one of my law clerks, I don't think it was Martin, but one of my law clerks and I just looked out the window, which shows that we're not very bright. At any rate, it was a terrible experience, and we'll never forget it.
Yeah, in fact, that guy, Gary McKnight was his name. His mother wrote Senator Dole months prior, just a few months prior to this incident, and was asking the senator for help for her son, that he, had what she thought had been dealt kind of a raw deal, and what could he do to help. And of course, by that time, it was a matter of the court, and it was out of his jurisdiction. And so I wrote the letter back to her and said, very sorry, it's out of my jurisdiction, and to consult her attorney. And of course, how did we know at that time that a few months later he'd be in our building and we'd have such a terrible tragedy.
Life-changing experience.
Yeah.
23 years ago already. Thank you again, both. This was a wonderful, wonderful discussion, and I hope all of you again will come up. We've got some materials from the Dole archives, notes and things of the senators. You can take a look at the heft of this wonderful disc recorder that he used, and some really wonderful things from the Washburn archives as well. President Farley, is he still here? Yeah, he wanted to come and say a word. Join me in welcoming him.
Hello, everyone, and welcome tonight. This is a very special evening to honor and to recognize and to remember a very special person. Senator Dole has been so good to Washburn University. He has been involved in so many things here, and he is truly one of our special graduates. We're very, very proud of him. And this is probably not going to be a shock to you. He has been communicating with us tonight. He has been emailing and texting John Penniger, back here in the back, about every 4 minutes, wanting to know how things going. Who said what? And he wanted he wanted to recognize his very, very good friend, Sam Crow. This was his best friend in School of Law. This is his best lifelong friend, and along with Ruth, who really is the person that made Sam what he is. And can you really reveal that she really told you what the opinion should be? Maybe you don't want to do that.
Yes, I can.
But he recognized that Judge Crow is a very special person as well, and a tremendous judge, and he has been pleased to know you all these years, and he is really happy that you were willing to come out tonight. And Susie, who worked for him for a long time, he says he remembers vividly her personality and how she dealt with people that came into the office or that communicated with his office. And he could always trust her to say the right thing, to do the right thing, to make people leave feeling, maybe we helped them and maybe we didn't, but they would feel good when they left the office. And particularly, he was fond of people asking him to do things, and he said, "Sure, we'll do that." And what he meant was, "Sure, Susie will do that." He thinks that she got him enough votes to get elected several different times. So he wanted to thank you. He wanted to thank you tonight as well. I don't know whether those votes you were helping recruit people to vote for him or whether you actually voted that many times. But he's been communicating all evening this evening, and we ought to thank him. And John will pass the word back to him how much we appreciated what he's done for all of us and what he's done for the state of Kansas. And thank you for coming out tonight, and thanks to the Dole Institute, the University of Kansas Alumni Association, of course, the Washburn Alumni Association, and to you for actually coming out tonight. And come down and look at some of these. I love old photographs, and these are great photographs and great memorabilia, and just some of the many things that each of these organizations have. So thanks for coming out tonight. Thank you.
Okay, now I know there are Dole staffers in the audience, so you have to either come talk to me before the end of the night or email me, because I do want to hear from you, and I want to hear about your experience, so we can add that. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much. You're very kind, old people. You're very sweet.
Come by it naturally.
Thank you, my dear.
Good stories.
Hey, it was all right to be with you.
You too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.